Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:08 p.m. in Central Europe. I need hardly say that depression prevails throughout. Fall is here with a vengeance, as can be determined by the prevalence of fall allergies, to which I always succumb, and people falling ill. Already, with the change of seasons, everyone's ill, everyone's got the flu. So yeah, I mean, everything is bleak here in Hungary. That's my eternal introduction. But anyway, on a happier note, welcome everybody who has joined me. Really very happy to see you all. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things to discuss. So yesterday, when I recorded a podcast on the sanctions imposed on Russians over interference in the 2024 election, I did it in a very light-hearted way, because I was doing it when the story first broke, and I hadn't really fully grasped the magnitude of what's taking place, because this is quite a serious sanction that has been imposed by the United States against RT and Sputnik. I frankly don't know how Sputnik will be able to continue to function in the United States. I mean, RT and Sputnik are obviously already banned throughout Europe. They certainly can't hold any offices anywhere in Europe, and of course, it's not even available on the internet unless you have a VPN. And fortunately, as long as you pay for the VPN, you can still watch RT. Now, the United States hadn't really done that. The United States had imposed a sanction of sort on RT by forcing it to register as a foreign agent. But RT had been also pushed out after February 2022 from all of the cable carriers. So none of the cable carriers was carrying RT anymore. However, RT was available on the internet, and I don't think I haven't been to the United States now for a couple of years, so I don't think you need a VPN to get RT on the internet. But now that they've sanctioned pretty much the entire apparat of RT, obviously including Simonian, but pretty much all the senior figures at RT, and said all of their assets to be frozen, and then no one may conduct any kind of transactions with any of these entities, any of the entities owned by RT and all the people of RT. Then I don't quite see how RT and Sputnik can continue to function in the United States. So up until now, while the RT America did close down in 2022, Sputnik had continued to function, but I don't see how Sputnik can continue. So, and you probably saw that Scott Ritter has said that he's not going to go on contributing to RT, not because he has any issues with RT or Sputnik, but simply because he lives in the United States and he has to adhere to US laws. And if he were to continue to work for RT, he would be in violation of US laws, and he doesn't particularly end up in prison. So, I don't know. It's I mean, so in the past, one has to say RT has shown great ingenuity in getting around sanctions, but I don't know whether they can quite do it now. I don't know how they can go on with keeping. I mean, they have a Sputnik office in DC, and I've contributed to them. You know, I do it on a regular basis. In fact, I did something for Sputnik yesterday, but I don't know how long that would continue, because I mean, I'm not in the United States, so I'm okay. But if I were in the United States, then I would be adding some value. And I guess Sputnik, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of RT, in conducting any kind of a economic activity, would be in violation of U.S. sanctions, and would therefore be in danger of imprisonment. So I can't see how RT and Sputnik can continue in the United States. But I mean, obviously, then they're out in, as far as Europe is concerned, but in the United States. Now, so that's one thing. The other thing is this very strange business, and I can't say I fully grasp this issue of Tenet Media, which apparently was created by RT, by employees of RT, and they got a lot of money, $10 million, which is a lot of money, and it got to build itself as a production company. But they were also essentially distributing. So how exactly they worked it, whether they commissioned podcasts by influencers, and then they distributed the podcast, or whether they actually directly commissioned the podcast, and then the said podcasts were then distributed to all the video platforms, or they just simply took the existing podcast and said, okay, well, we'll pay you a fee and we will distribute it around the world. By the way, they had a lot of money, so they were $10 million to play with. But the strange thing was that they were distributing this money to internet influencers who are already have a lot of money. And that just seems very strange. I mean, if you've got a lot of money to play with, then give it to people who don't have money. I mean, why give the money to Benny Johnson, who has a big following on Twitter, and he has a huge following on his podcast? I don't watch it myself, since I kind of pretty much know what he's going to say. Same with Tim Pool. Tim Pool has a huge following. Again, he has Timcast, those podcasts he does. They generate a lot of money, and he was receiving a lot of he got a lot of money from this Tenet Media. Now, Tim Pool and Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin. Again, Rubin is a lot of money. I mean, he set up Locals. So he has money. Again, his podcasts have a big subscriber base. But Rubin was also getting money from Tenet Media. So it was very strange why they would want to give money to people who already have money and who already exert influence. I mean, they as internet influencers. Now, quite why Rubin, Tim Pool, and Benny Johnson have this huge internet presence, I don't know. Maybe somebody can enlighten me, can tell me what it is that they do that merits that fantastic following. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I mean, I can get some things. I mean, I can see why Alex Jones has a huge following. I mean, he does do something very interesting. whether you agree with him, you don't agree with him, he's a very unusual character, and his show is quite interesting. He's very entertaining. Same with Bannon. I mean, Bannon, there's all sorts of problems about Bannon, but nonetheless, he does a good show. And if you want to be caught up in the whole world of MAGA and bringing back Donald Trump and so on, and as well as Bannon's kind of ebullient demagogic personality. I mean, he's a real demagogue. Then I can see why people would tune into Bannon. And therefore, he'd have a big viewer base, and it's also basically funded by advertisers. And at the same time, but these influencers, this Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, I don't get it. But but leave that aside for the moment. Johnson and Tim Pool immediately said, well, we didn't know. We absolutely didn't know. We didn't know that this money that we were getting, this contract that we had signed with Tenet Media, was coming from RT. We just thought this is just an independent media company, and that this $400,000 a month retainer that I was getting, and I think Benny Johnson was getting a $400,000 a month retainer. It's quite an amazing sum. I just deserve it. I mean, I'm so bloody good that I deserve this. But they didn't know that was coming from RT. Now, whenever people say these things, well, I don't know about RT. This is really, really infuriating. First of all, you expected to have a little bit of intelligence, and you'd have to wonder who is giving you this kind of money. I mean, who has that kind of money to play with? Now, some businessman, a businessman is just going to toss around money. No. Businessmen don't do that. That's not what they do. Governments do that. Governments, are in a position to toss around a lot of money because they're not really answerable to anyone. Now, it's possible that these right-wing influencers thought that Israel was behind this because, they're all very pro-Israeli, they're all very Zionist. And so they thought, well, maybe the money's coming from Israel, in which case I thought, oh, well, that's fine. If the money's from Israel, that's okay. So therefore, they don't have a problem with taking money from governments. So that's the case. But this feigning ignorance is so contemptible. I mean, at a different level, this brings back memories. God, this is going back a long way. Back in the 1960s, ever since the start of the Cold War, the CIA was clandestinely funding all kinds of magazines and cultural institutions and cultural conferences as part of the great Cold War effort. We needed to win the ideological war against the Soviet Union. And so the CIA was just, through a cutout, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they were bankrolling, highbrow magazines. And one of the most notable of these highbrow magazines was Encounter, which was published in London. And its editors, well, the editors changed. Well, the first editor was Irving Kristol. And then, so he was obviously the kind of the CIA man there. And then they had Stephen Spender, who was a poet. But they needed to have a kind of a literary figure. So you had as two editors. Well, of course, but Irving Kristol was obviously running the magazine. So, but they had, it's Irving Kristol and Stephen Spender. And that looked very good because, Stephen Spender was a distinguished poet. And so if it was just edited by Irving Kristol, no one would really take it seriously. But if it's edited by Irving Kristol and Steven Spender, then that was. But eventually, Crystal went back to the United States, and then the editor became Melvin Lasky. Now, both Crystal and Lasky knew perfectly well that the money was coming from the CIA. The poet was Steven Spender, and then I can't remember who's. Again, another poet took over from him. But in any way, but in the 60s, it came out, the obvious truth, which was the money was coming from the CIA. And it should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain. Well, how do you turn out a very, very nice looking magazine, which pays its writers? I mean, it didn't pay them very much, but nonetheless, it did manage to pay its writers. And how can it do it? It's a small circulation magazine, and how do you just turn out this very nice thing? I mean, it's expensive to turn out the magazine. So when it finally came out that it was the CIA, everyone said, "Oh, I didn't know. I thought it was some businessman." It's always some businessman, some strange, benevolent, angelic businessman who was, sitting in his country and apparently in a country home, and just writes checks, which is what businessmen do. I just like cutting checks and getting nothing in return. But anyway, so it was all ridiculous stuff. But there was, again, a lot of protests, a lot of people, resigning. Oh my God, I would never have written for Encounter if I'd known that I was getting paid by the CIA. And so it was that was so that I'm sorry, you have this the same kind of thing that now. I mean, ultimately, there's nothing really terrible about funding, money, coming from the CIA, coming from RT or anywhere. I mean, people have to get paid. And I mean, if the source of the money is government, then, they get paid by government. The problem with these people like Benny Johnson and Rubin and the rest of them who now, lifting up their skirts in shock that they had been duped by RT, is that they're giving credence to the argument that there's something wrong with what RT did. I mean, I think there is something wrong in the sense that I don't think it should have been tossing money around in such a haphazard way. And there's probably something wrong in that they essentially left a trace that the FBI would easily discover. I mean, keep in mind, RT had already been in the crosshairs of the FBI and the CIA and all the rest of the agencies ever since the Russiagate stuff. So so they had to have known that if they start funneling money, particularly money of this scale, the FBI would immediately get onto that, and then, as is their wont, they will pick and choose the time to strike, and then which is what they did. So they struck September. We're just 2 months away from the election. Harris, it's very questionable whether Harris can pull this off. And what do? So they, you have to believe this thing was set up in 2023. This Tenet Media company. I would imagine, given the scale of the the wire transfers, which is a lot of money, the FBI would have been onto them, fairly early on, and so they would just wait to to pounce, and this is the time to pounce. And they, again, they've been building up this RussiaGate 2.0, 3.0. I guess it's 3.0 because RussiaGate played a role in the 2020 election. So they build up the RussiaGate 3.0 for some time. I mean, keep in mind they had the FBI raid on Dimitri Simes' home a few weeks ago. And again, remember, they tried to go after Dimitri Simes in 2016. I mean, Mueller was obviously determined to get Simes because he wanted to show that somehow there was a Trump Simes Putin link. That Simes was somehow the go-between between Trump and Russia. And so, if you look at the Mueller report, Simes' name appears, 30 times or whatever. He's very prominent there, but they couldn't get anything because at the moment, all Simes did was he arranged one talk by Trump at the National Interest Center, or whatever it was called, Center for the National Interest, or whatever. That's all Simes did. I think there may have been people, ill-intentioned people, who were pushing Simes to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin. Again, there were bad-intentioned characters there. There were people who were pushing for this, and but Simes, smartly said, no, I don't think this is a good idea, and departed from that. George Papadopoulos, this very, very strange character who was at the heart of RussiaGate, was very determined to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin. Again, who put him up to it? Who urged him in 2015, 2016? Oh, you got to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin. Why? Why do we need a meeting between Trump and Putin? Other than, of course, to try to embed in the public mind that there was a Trump-Putin connection. So it was, clearly a setup in the works. So, but going back to that, so if you know that the FBI are setting up another RussiaGate, I don't know why would you give them ammunition? And the ammunition obviously hurts RT and Sputnik. As I say, I don't know how Sputnik will be able to continue in the US. But it also hurts these various right-wing influences that you've been cultivating. They kind of look rather silly. They took a lot of money for virtually no work at all. They didn't ask any questions as to where this money was coming from. And so now, they've been discredited. Now, I'm sure they will recover, and it's not going to be a disaster for them. But it's certainly an embarrassment. But I say this argument, well, the RT is behind this, and so it's obviously just pathetic. Because so what? Even RT's behind it. So damn what? You're entitled to take money. You produce something. You're entitled to be paid. So we all do that. So you're entitled to be paid. I mean, whether you should have known that it was RT behind it. But so what? I mean, whether it's RT you didn't know RT was behind it or whatever. There's nothing wrong with getting paid for your product. And again, as far as interference in the U.S. election is concerned, well, everybody interferes automatically in an election. I mean, whenever you open your mouth, you are interfering in the election. If you're not interfering in the election, then you're probably doing something, productive, knitting a sweater or something. But it's a meaningless term interfering in the U.S. election, and of course they know it's a meaningless term. And they're using this term, this interference in the US election. They're using that plus the idea that Russia was interfering in the US election. They're doing that in order to silence all speech. Because now everyone gets very, very nervous. And that's really the key, which was that, that you better watch it as to what you say, because the DOJ could come after you. And keep in mind, it's very hard to see what crimes have been committed here. It's like they issue their the DOJ issues their indictment, but what's the crime here? See, there's speech. Is you can't restrain speech in the United States. That's the glory of the First Amendment, and it applies to everyone. Everybody is entitled to speak, and the fact that you get paid for your speech, so what? I mean, Obama, he gets paid, I don't know, $1 million for speech by shady corporations. How much? Hillary Clinton, all the politicians, how much do they get paid? And what do they want in return for that? They don't just simply give you a lot of money for nothing. They want something in return for giving you, for paying you for some banal speech. So it was always kind of a fake story. But it's also, but it's given ammunition for the Democrats, aligned with the intelligence agencies, to run with Russia. Now you'd have to say, well, why are they doing that? I am assuming that the Democrats' internal polling are indicating that Harris is in trouble. I mean, even from the polls that show, oh, Harris is leading or whatever, it's clear that even if she has a lead, it's not going to be enough for her to win. I mean, it's because if you look at the 2016 election and the 2020 election, in both cases, first Hillary Clinton and then Biden went into an election night with very substantial leads in the popular vote and in the individual states. So now, so much bigger lead than anything the polls are showing for Harris. And that wasn't enough for Clinton to win, and it barely got Biden over the line in 2020 with much bigger leads than anything Harris has. So I think that there's a real sense here that that Harris is in trouble. That Harris is not building up the kind of lead she needs to go into the election to secure a victory. She goes in leading by 2 or 3 points, and it's a dead heat in all of the battleground states. She will lose the election. So I think that that's why they're bringing out the big guns. And I think that's Russiagate. But what is so striking about the return of Russiagate is that you watch CNN, you watch the MSNBC, and say, oh well, what's again? Russia is interfering in this election. Russia's taking a very very big interest in who wins, and then and they're determined to see Trump win, and so on. Is that at no time is there any acknowledgement that you basically got the whole story wrong. In 2016, 2020, you got the story wrong, completely wrong. You presented no evidence. Mueller, after doing all that investigating, the FBI, after doing all that investigating, came up with nothing. You came up with no evidence of any major Russian interference in the election, other than, interference that other countries engage in, and actually Russia engages in a lot less than others. It engaged in far less interference than the United Kingdom did through Christopher Steele and his stupid dossier in 2016. And then we had the interference on the part of the 51 national security officials who said that the Hunter Biden laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian disinformation operation. They had no basis for saying that at all, but it was clearly an attempt to do in Trump by suggesting that this was that the Russians were interfering in the election in order to secure the vote for Trump. So again, and that's been, but however, as I said, Mueller came up with nothing, but the Hunter Biden laptop has been established. It was genuine. There was no Russian tampering with the laptop. It was genuine, and it was known to be genuine. It was known to be genuine from December 2019 onwards. Throughout 2020, it was known to be genuine. Yet even so, the FBI kept warning the social media companies that some big Russian disinformation operation is underway, and as Zuckerberg says, it's likely to be involved Hunter Biden and Burisma. So he said they knew exactly, they were already waiting for something to drop, and so therefore they were able then to put a stop on the Hunter Biden story. So that was also that, but that had nothing to do with Russia. So now this is the third election in a row where we're going again with this Russia story, and we're supposed to believe that somehow RT has this, plays this enormous role in the U.S. election. When you can't, it's so hard even to get RT. I mean, it's at least in 2016, and and maybe in 2020, but I'm not sure. But at least in 2016, you could get RT on your basic cable provider. If you got your cable provider, you got RT. You can't get RT now. I mean, you have to go on the internet and look for it. And yet it's this ubiquitous presence. So that's the Russiagate 3.0. I think there's going to be more of that. I think there are going to be more shoes to drop. They're not just going to they're going to continue with this, and so that's going to be that. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments and questions. Let me just find that. So let's go to the locals page. We've got our friends on locals. Stone River says, "Is locals living on borrowed time?" Huh. I don't know. Is it? I don't know. I mean, do you know something I don't? I hope not. But I mean, if there's something you've heard, please share it. Anyway, but thank you very much, Stone River, for your generosity. Dale Owen says, "I guess this historian interviewed by Tucker Carlson will be trashed and denigrated like David Irving and John Charmley. God help him." Now, this historian, Daryl Cooper, and I have to say, I don't really know. Before the Tucker Carlson interview, I didn't really know who Daryl Cooper was. I, as I explained in my podcast, I didn't think he handled it particularly well. I thought he didn't have a particularly good presentation manner. I thought that he tended to get very discursive, was easily distracted, rambled, and and therefore didn't really follow through to make his points. And I think Tucker tried to press him on issues, but he would just go off on tangents. His strongest points during the interview was about the origins of World War II, and in particular the question of how did we get from this conflict between Germany and Poland, and again what he could I think and should have said is that the Hitler regime was deplorable. I mean you can't just in the middle of the 20th century start returning to the into the Middle Ages with your hatred of the Jews. So that was the and then he was the way he was conducting his diplomacy was not something that others would take kindly to. I mean, it was a diplomacy via ultimatums, and nobody particularly likes ultimatums. So that he did it. Whatever his arguments, whatever Hitler's claims, and these claims were not unreasonable on the Sudetenland and on Poland, the Polish corridor, Danzig. So the claims were not unreasonable. He himself was unreasonable. And but the point is that Chamberlain was the statesman, clearly the statesman, who basically, however much he didn't like Hitler, took the view that it makes no sense for Great Britain to go to war against him. Britain was just not in a position to fight Germany. It was barely recovered from World War I. It hadn't yet recovered from World War I. What Chamberlain also suspected was that France would prove to be a very ineffective ally. So it was very unlikely that Britain and France would emerge victorious against Germany. And Chamberlain also believed, like many people believed at the time, that the greatest threat wasn't Hitler, but the greatest threat was the Soviet Union, Soviet communism, with all these crazy fanatics who want to spread world revolution, and so that's a much bigger danger to the British Empire than Hitler. So Chamberlain wanted to avoid war at all costs. Churchill wanted a war, and pressed and pressed and pressed. He was on the back benches. He wasn't a part of the government. He pressed for war. Kept attacking the government, appeasement policy, and then when after Munich, which incidentally was popular, the signing of the Munich Agreement had been popular. When Chamberlain came back from Munich with his famous piece of paper and says that here we got a signature, and it said, "I believe this is peace in our time." What then happened was Czechoslovakia collapsed. I think that they took the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland became part of the Reich. It had been part of Austria, so it became now part of the Hitler's Reich. But the rest of Czechoslovakia, those of Bohemia and Moravia, just simply collapsed. And then Hitler established what he called the protectorate over the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Bohemia and Moravia, Slovakia went its own way. So basically, the Czech part and the Slovakia part, they couldn't stay together. This was taken to be Hitlerian aggression, which he really wasn't. I mean, Hitler what happened in Czechoslovakia really after Munich had nothing to do with Hitler. I mean, Hitler just simply took the Sudetenland, but the collapse was something that was among the Czechs and Slovaks themselves. But nonetheless, once Hitler established this protectorate over Bohemia and Moravia, this was saying, well, Hitler's an aggressor. He's broken his pledges. He just wants to conquer all of Europe, and then suddenly Britain drastically changed its policy by issuing the guarantees, just a blank check, absolute blank checks to Poland. And Romania as well. But Poland was most important because Poland was in confrontation with Germany. Chamberlain was really pushed into this really against his better judgment. He really didn't want to do this. But somehow public opinion, under the influence of Churchill, had so become so enraged that he kind of followed this and issued this blank check. Now, Hitler, was still determined to come to terms with Poland and just basically say he couldn't very well just leave it at that. He couldn't just very well not take Danzig. I mean, that was that was a sine qua non of Germany's demands. He had to take Danzig. I mean, otherwise he'd look like a fool. You take the Sudetenland, but you don't take Danzig. So he went ahead with that, but given these guarantees, Hitler then decided, okay, well, there's no way that Britain and France can fight a war against me without an alliance with the Soviet Union. So I'll just cut them off from that. And he offered the Soviet Union a non-aggression pact. And then he thought, well, once there's that, we signed the non-aggression pact, then Britain and France will just realize that they can't possibly fight this war. If you don't have the Soviet Union with you, then there's no way you can hope to fight against Germany. I mean, it took Britain, France, Russia, and the United States to defeat Germany in World War I. Now, if you don't have Russia and you don't have the United States, then you have no hope for victory. So Hitler thought that that's it. Once he's done that, then Britain and France will cool their heels and not go to war over Poland. But nonetheless, so he attacks Poland September the 1st, and then to his astonishment, Britain and France declare war. He didn't really think they would do it because it seemed like such a stupid policy. And then, of course, after he had defeated Poland again, which was inevitable, there was no comparison between the power of Germany and the power of Poland. Then after he had defeated Poland, he thought, well, then then he offered peace terms. He said, well, look, the war's over, so why not sign a peace agreement? I mean, I have no claims on France. At that stage, he had made no claims on France. He had not made any attempt to change the western border, Germany's western border, and I have no claims on the British Empire. I don't even want my Germany's colonies back. The British and the French seized them at the start of World War I, never gave them back, but Germany wasn't asking for them back. But instead, they continued with this pursuing this war. And with increasing aggression, because ignoring all of Hitler's peace terms, and again, very much now because Churchill was now part of the government once the Britain and France had declared war on Germany. Churchill re-entered the government. He was the First Lord of the Admiralty. and then Churchill really, started pushing for his very belligerent policy, such as mining the ports of Norway. So if you mine the ports of Norway, then essentially Germany will not be able to get its hands on Sweden's iron ore. That's basically if Germany doesn't get its iron ore, then basically it's got nothing for its military machine. Well, naturally, Germany wasn't going to sit still for that, and so Germany then, but then attack Norway was always likely. The Norwegians were very unhappy. Norway had no say at all in the matter of the mining of Norway's ports, and then there's so that was Norway, and then of course since the Hitler's peace proposals had all been rejected, then he essentially had really very little option but then to try and finish the war off on his own terms. Something which is, he's very much unlike Putin. Hitler he didn't think like Putin. I mean, he wasn't a procrastinator. Putin's a kind of a procrastinator. Hitler wasn't a procrastinator. He just made decisions, and they said, okay, well, basically, they've rejected all our peace plans. I've got one more arrow in my quiver, which is I just knock out France, defeat France, and then that surely would be that. And he did. So that was in the spring of 1940. Again, to everyone's astonishment, France collapsed. And then well, now Britain will accept a peace agreement, and Britain again didn't refuse to. Even at that moment, that they refused to do so. In fact, Britain did the opposite. Britain actually sank the French navy because the British attacked France's navy because they were afraid that they would fall under the control of the Germans. So the British were actually killing the French, who didn't really appreciate their navy being attacked. And then again, the British started. Well, okay, what more can we do? We got the Balkans. This is going to be the soft underbelly of Europe. This is going to be how we're going to attack Germany from the rear. And then again, Hitler said, well, I gotta move this. I gotta deal with this problem now, because after he first signs a non-aggression pact with Yugoslavia, then the British topple the king who had signed the non-aggression pact. They bring in his son, who reneges on the non-aggression pact. So obviously, this was part of the British plan, the soft underbelly of Europe, which is they used in World War I, and then of course that provoked the Hitlerian attack on Yugoslavia. So, no question, Hitler was not a good guy, but the problem is, and I think this is the point that Cooper was emphasizing. I think others had made this story before. It wasn't particularly original, but as you said, Dale, I mean, Irving had talked about this, and then John Charmley had talked about this, which is Churchill was determined to keep this war going. He had no hope of Britain defeating Germany. There was no way Britain can defeat Germany. So all he could do was to hope that somebody else would get into the war. Ideally, the United States, but if necessary, the Soviet Union. And so the question then is that this is the World War II, which is supposed to be the good war. And then you say, well, it's a good war for whom? A quarrel between Germany and Poland has now expanded into a world war. And then 50, 60 million people died in that war. And the other then, how is this a good war? How why would it have been much worse than to have come to an agreement earlier on and to prevented the expansion of this war? And so now this guy is not in this. I mean, he has his followers. He's on Substack, so I don't know. Maybe Substack can move against him. I mean, there probably will be pressure on Substack to kick him out. Maybe pressure to kick him off YouTube. I mean, Irving was a kind of an interesting case because he made a lot of money on his books, and was doing well. I mean, commercially. I mean, and he even enjoyed a certain grudging respect from historians. I mean, they like didn't like, he was a little extreme, and he didn't like his very drastic conclusions, particularly negative conclusions about Churchill. But nonetheless, he enjoyed a grudging respect. A.J.P. Taylor would always give his books quite favorable reviews. Gordon Craig, the historian of Germany, also gave him quite favorable reviews. It was the Deborah Lipstadt case that really hurt him. That was it hurt him because she brought up something that hadn't really been an issue up until then. I remember he hadn't been particularly associated with the Holocaust. That was just not his issue. I mean, he'd written about German war effort. He'd written books about German generals. He'd obviously written the books about Hitler's war, and then he'd written this 2-volume book, Churchill's War. But he hadn't really talked about the Holocaust, and it was that really hurt him, because when she called him a Holocaust denier, that was painful. And then, of course, he filed a lawsuit against her. I don't know why he did that. He was never going to win that. And then he got the sort of the moniker, oh, he's a Holocaust denier, where he wasn't. But then I think he went down that rabbit hole because up until then he had really taken no interest specifically about the Holocaust, and on many aspects of it he wasn't a denier. I mean, as again, like Cooper seemed much closer. I mean, he was so discursive and rambled on so many topics that he never really got onto that issue. But Irving had been much more explicit and says, that the Einsatzgruppen had been a part of the German kind of mass murder operation after Barbarossa. He never denied that there were mass executions that were carried out by the Einsatzgruppen after the invasion of the Soviet Union. There's something that Cooper did seem to be denying, and said, it was all about, there were millions of people were falling into the arms of the invading armies, and they didn't know what to do with them. That seems to be much more dubious, because I think the plan for the mass execution of Jews and commissars, and the two were taken to be synonymous. That was in play. That was in play on the German general staff, that this was going to happen. So I mean, it's interesting the Tucker engage with this. I mean, I would have been much happier had, say, Pat Buchanan been there, but obviously he's a little elderly now, or again Irving himself, but he also is a little old now. But nonetheless, I like the discussion. Anyway, Dale goes on. In the front line of these attacks against revisionist historians is the ghastly and overrated Richard Evans. Yep, he played a key part in that Deborah Lipstadt trial. That was a very lavishly funded. She got a lot of money, so she commissioned a report on Irving, which was written by Evans. And it was a real hatchet job on Irving, because what Evans wrote, he's just he's a hack, he's not a serious historian, and so on. So Yeah, so you're right. I mean, I think he's yeah, very overrated. He was even involved in the Irving trial. Yeah, that's right. A disgusting individual. His book, In Hitler's Shadow, contains a list of personal attacks on Charmley that strangely relate to his Bertie Wooster clothes style. The man defiles the historic profession. Yeah, I think so. Um, yeah, that's right. I thought that report that he presented, was just yeah, it was just ridiculous. I mean, he complains that Irving was one-sided. So, well, this is just one-sided. I mean, it's not in any sense a report. It's an assessment of Irving's work or anything like that. This was just a hatchet job. Every single thing Irving wrote, he took a negative view of. But that was yeah. Anyway, Ivan Groznev says, George, do you think Iran will end up responding to Israel? Well, I wish I could say the answer is yes, but I suspect that the answer is no. I think Iran just simply isn't strong enough. I mean, it's clear from everything that we've seen with Iran's capabilities, and we've talked about these things. The fact that they have these security lapses, they allow the scientists to get knocked off. You have a Hamas leader who's executed, well, not executed, assassinated in Iran. You had the whole with the fiasco with that helicopter and its president dying, and then that limp response to the assassinations of their generals in the consulate in Damascus, and then again the weak response to the Soleimani assassination. A response was less than weak. I mean, clownishly, the Iranians, shot down a Ukrainian civilian airliner, because they got so confused, and they didn't even cut off the airspace. The minimum they would have done after attacking the American barracks in Iraq was at least close down the airspace. And they didn't even do that. And then, in the confusion, they shot down the Ukrainian civilian airliner. So when you add it all up, Iran just isn't strong enough for the time being. I mean, I think this will probably change, but for the time being, Iran cannot take on Israel. And Israel knows this. The United States knows this. So if Iran does anything, not only will it have to fight off Israel, it's going to have to fight off the United States. And the United States knows Iran doesn't have anything that can hurt it. So I think I thought that they might do a symbolic thing, just like the symbolic thing after the Soleimani assassination, the symbolic thing after the attack on the Damascus consulate. But they're not even getting that. I mean, I think they will probably ask the Americans, "Can we do a symbolic attack on Israel, please?" And the Americans said, "Nah." So I don't think it's going to happen. I'm afraid that's again, it's like we've talked about, multipolarity. I think we're a long way from multipolarity, a long way from Iran being a major player in the world. So, anyway, NKMRD, so good evening to you. Thank you very much for your generosity. Marty, also thank you very much. Good evening, George and Gagglers. Good evening, Marty. Always good to have you. Steve Brown says, I had to flee another local channel due to censorship. Not censorship by that channel, but censorship by locals itself. Huh. What kind of censorship? What was censored? I didn't, I didn't know locals was censoring, but I'd like to know more. Judy Hotchkiss. Judy, thank you very much. Always good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for your generosity. Putin's response to all this. He trolls Kamala. Our favorite, if I may say so, was the current president, Mr. Biden. He was removed from the race, but he recommended that all his supporters support Ms. Harris. That's what we'll do too. We will support her. He said this today during the Q&A at Vladivostok, that big East Asian Economic Union or East Eurasian Economic Union meeting, and it was very funny. I mean, because when he said this, the audience just burst out laughing. So it's like nobody really took this very seriously. Now, the reason they didn't take it seriously wasn't that, oh, that's because he's supporting Trump. Nobody really thinks he's supporting Trump. But the way he framed it, and Judy, you put it exactly, he says, well, Biden asked his supporters to throw their weight behind Harris, and that's what we will do. So, in other words, we are among Biden's supporters. And so, therefore, since Biden has instructed his supporters, that means he's instructed us also to throw our weight behind Harris. And that's just so laughable, and that's why everyone just burst out laughing. The woman who was moderating started laughing, and then Zaharova was started laughing. I mean, it was very, very funny. But ultimately, I don't think the Russians are expecting anything good from anyone. I don't think they're expecting anything good from Harris. I don't think they're expecting anything good from Trump. And I think there are some people who are writing today, oh, well, he somehow thinks that Harris or the Democrats are more predictable than Trump is. Trump is erratic, Trump is mercurial, and so he's a bit concerned about Trump. I'm not really buying that. I mean, I think that Harris could be just as mercurial and erratic as Trump is. Harris is obviously rather weak. She's obviously in over her head. She's out of her depth when it comes to foreign policy. Therefore, she will be completely at the mercy of her advisors. Now, I don't know what her advisors are going to say, but I don't think it's going to be anything good. And I think that she, as Trump, like Trump, will probably go for escalation. I really think that when you get what happens when you get a kind of a stalemate in a war, and I'm assuming, I mean, I know people are thinking there's going to be a big collapse in Ukraine and there's going to be a big Russian breakthrough. I have my doubts about that, but it's not impossible that there will be a major Russian breakthrough before the election. But I don't think so. So when you get into that stalemate, what do both sides think about? Well, you try to escalate, try to change the equation, and that by doing that, you will somehow secure a negotiated outcome. I mean, they kind of did that repeatedly in World War I, when year after year, on the Western Front, there was just no movement. You just couldn't move the front line. And so both sides were trying to figure out, we got to do something in order to just ensure some kind of movement. So I have a feeling that both Harris and Trump will start out 2025 with some major escalation, thinking that, well, now Putin will realize how serious we are. Putin will realize we're here for the long haul. We're here. We're not going to just give up, and then therefore we'll do that. So I tend to think that their policies aren't going to change, and I think that the Russians also think that. And Putin, I think, was just having fun in confusing everyone with his talk about oh well, we're supporting Harris, and it is confusing because we just had these stories over the last couple of days in which the DOJ and of course all their media acolytes are all saying that Trump that the Russians are interfering on our elections, and once again they're doing it in order to help out their good friend Trump. And they are going to go on with that story. So once he says, well, no, we're supporting Harris, then that adds confusion. Now, of course, the media immediately say, no, that's just Putin is just trolling us. Putin is just, we know for a fact that he's supporting Trump. They don't know anything. But we know for a fact, yeah. And so he's just trolling us. He's just trying to throw us off the scent by saying he's supporting Harris. I think Putin's view is that nothing good will come from this election. Nothing good for Russia will come out of this election. And so I think he's just having a little bit of fun by confusing Americans. The other thing which is interesting, and I'm not yet sure whether there's any real connection with this, and that's this woman, Lauren Chen. I have to say I don't really know much about it. Like there are all these internet influencers who have this fantastic following. They got 1 million followers on Twitter, and always baffled me how that happens. But anyway, but Lauren Chen was the one who was getting this money, this RT money, this $10 million was being funneled through Lauren Chen and her husband. Now, Lauren Chen is one of these right-wing influencers. I think she's associated with Blaze Media, which is Glenn Beck's outfit. But what's interesting about Lauren Chen is that recently she has been attacking Trump. And, she was saying somehow the conservatives should not vote for Trump. Trump is a sellout. Trump is not really interested in conservatism. Trump is a rhino. Trump hasn't held a position on abortion. Trump has no interest in securing the border. Trump has no interest in stopping mass migration. Now, leave aside the question of whether that's an accurate assessment, but it's interesting that the person who's getting this money, the money is being funneled through her, should be attacking Trump. And what she's doing is interesting, because what she's doing is attacking Trump from the right and saying, well, he is selling out our fundamental principles. And this has gained traction in the media, particularly on the issue of abortion. I mean, I don't know. Anytime you pick up Politico, The Hill, and the Times and the Post, they're all talking about Trump and abortion. Oh, Trump is tying himself in knots over abortion. This is this terrible problem for Trump, because his base, his right-wing supporters, are very unhappy. Now, I don't think it will hurt him that much. But, the media want to obviously play this up. But nonetheless, it's very interesting that this was the view of Lauren Chen, who's been attacking Trump, and Lauren Chen was the one who got this money. The money was funneled to her through her and her husband. Even more interesting is that she wasn't indicted. So remember, they indicted those two Russians, Kalashnikov and Afanasyeeva. but they didn't indict Lauren Chen. Now that's very interesting, because it suggests that that Lauren Chen may be an FBI asset, or the kind of a, or whoever, some national security state asset, and therefore she may be useful for the national security state in going after Trump. And again, so it's very interesting. She attacks Trump from the right. She gets this money from Russia, but instead of indicting her for money laundering, they leave her alone. They don't touch her. So there are all kinds of layers here as to what the plan is. But I think that I think it's a very, very, very significant. Trump is suddenly now. This has been the theme for the past month, that Trump is having real difficulties on the right, that he's losing his support on the right. And who is one of the leaders of the right that's attacking Trump? That's Lauren Chen. Lauren Chen's getting money from Russia, a lot of money, and the FBI doesn't, the Justice Department doesn't indict her for this. So, you can draw your own inferences from that. But it sort of adds again to the mystery of this whole thing. Now, just to finish this off, I really don't think the Russians are supporting any candidate in the election. I think they got burned badly in 2016. I think they were supporting Trump. I don't think they interfered in the election. I think that's all nonsense. There's no mechanism for any state to affect an election. But they had great hopes for Trump. They thought he was an outsider. They thought he was a pragmatist. They thought he was a businessman, and not one of these national security hawks. He would re-examine relations with Russia, but in fact, Trump was the opposite of everything they wanted. So they just burnt their fingers with Trump, and that may be just they've kind of become very disillusioned with him, and that may add a little bit to that to their sense that the hell with him. We'll just say how we like Harris. But I think that there is disappointment. I mean, Putin's like that. He gets very disappointed when he feels that he was snubbed. So I mean, he obviously talks about how he wanted to join NATO. Russia wanted to be a part of the West after the fall of the Soviet Union, and how he got the back of the hand from the West. And he feels very resentful about that. So I think they probably do harbor a grudge against Trump. Anyway, thank you, Judy. And then thanks to thank you for your generosity for the barkers. Yeah, the barkers. They're even worse than that. They go for the throat. But thank you so much. Steve Brown says all it takes is a reported post, and even if not censored by the channel, Locals also receives the report. A local admins will review it. I didn't realize that. I mean, naively, I just simply had assumed that I don't think that highly of David Rubin, but I thought at least the one thing Rubin would leave alone would be Locals. He said no censorship on Locals. So if that's going to come, then that's anyway. Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. And thank you again for your generosity. Cynthia says, if the Biden administration shuts down Tenet Media and blocks RT and Sputnik from being accessed in the US, can or will Trump reverse all that if he comes into power as president? Well, I would imagine he could. I mean, because I don't think there's any legislation that he can overcome. I mean, there was some legislation during Trump's term that tied his hands on lifting sanctions. There was they imposed the sanctions on Russia, Iran, maybe North Korea, the usual suspects. And there was a proviso there that the president cannot overturn this, and Trump vetoed it, and then Congress overturned his veto. But in this case, this is entirely a move on the part of the Justice Department. Now, I would imagine he wouldn't be able to do much without, at least closing down these criminal cases, because there are these criminal cases that are pending, and RT is at the center of these criminal cases. So while the DOJ is ostensibly pursuing this case against RT, I don't know that he'd be able to. I mean, he could. I mean, he could, but he would have to be a lot bolder than he has appeared to be in the past. He would have to then go defy the Justice Department. He would have to defy the Treasury. He would have to defy the State Department, and lift these the sanctions. That's not Trump's style. You get a feeling that he's kind of tired. He's a spent force. He's recycling all these old stories. He's regurgitating all the glory days of his president, what he said to Macron, what he said to Angela, and there doesn't seem to be the kind of energy about him that there was 2016. He is now looking his age, in a sense. I mean, he's now in his late 70s. And to do something like that, essentially to defy his own government on RT and Sputnik, that requires a lot of boldness and energy. And I don't see that there are particularly strong forces within the administration that would support him on that. I mean, they say, well, what the hell? What do we care? That's Russia's tough luck. Throughout his administration, he really didn't do anything for Russia. I mean, he closed down its consulates. He expelled all those diplomats. He imposed harsh sanctions. He sent the Javelin missiles to Ukraine. So, when he says, "Hey, I was the toughest president ever on Russia," there is some truth to that. And then of course it was under him that RT was forced to register as a foreign agent, which has never happened before. It's never, that state media are taken to be foreign agents, but it was under Trump, and so I think it's part of why I think the Russians are so disappointed in him, that they and let's leave aside the other issues, like walking away from arms control agreements like the INF Treaty, Open Skies Treaty. So he really didn't do anything to defy the national security state. So I have my doubts that he would do it now. Because he's looking at this and says, "Well, I don't care about this. What do I care about RT and Sputnik?" So, but I think that if he were to do it, I mean, it would have to be a step-by-step process, and I think the first step would have to be that these charges need to be dropped against these RT employees before he can lift the sanctions. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia, as always. And then Lynn says about the apropos of Judy's question about Kamala Harris, and then said with a wry smile, yeah, he smiled. I mean, everyone was just cracking up. I mean, it's a wonderful scene. I mean, if you can actually, I don't know if it's on YouTube. I saw I saw it on RT. They had the clip of this because everyone just started laughing. It was just so funny that he just said, well, I mean, the way he put it was that, well, Biden's not in the race, but Biden instructed his supporters to get behind Harris, and so since we are his supporters, we too are getting behind Harris. I mean, it was such a ludicrous thing to say that everyone just started laughing. Anyway, Stone River says, thank you so much, Stone River. I'm wondering how bad this repression of free speech may get. What will halt its march? Well, I don't think anything will halt its march if we get ourselves into a war. I mean, if things get very nasty, and the war in Ukraine gets really nasty, then forget about free speech. You can forget about locals. You can forget about everything else. Those things are going to be shut down right away. I mean, if this is what we get in peacetime, can you imagine how much repression we're going to get in wartime? No, there'll be no locals. There'll be no Rumble. There'll be no RT. There'll be nothing. So I think that goes together with the war. Whether we end up in war or not, I don't know. But I think that's how it'll be. But when you say what will halt its march, well, I don't think anything can halt the march. I mean, I really think that free speech is something that it doesn't come naturally to humanity. I mean, that's why, only one country in history ever actually established it in its constitution. I mean, it just made it in its constitution. It's unique to the United States that government cannot abridge speech. I mean, it's just unheard of. It doesn't exist anywhere else because everyone else is taken for granted. Well, of course, government can abridge speech. Why wouldn't it? I mean, that's it's part of the function of government to abridge speech. But here it is in the United States. So it's not something that's natural. So repression and the silencing of dissent, I mean, that's much more in the normal run of humanity, whether the silencing came from the church, from kings, emperors, but that's more or less most of the time, people were not free to speak. I mean, even all the great philosophers we think of, in the 17th and 18th centuries, they all wrote within constraints. They knew perfectly well that there are things that they could not say. Absolutely, they knew that, hey, if I go down a particular path, I will end up in prison. So like philosophers who basically didn't really believe in the existence of a deity, they couldn't say it. They knew that, hey, that's the if I want to retain my position, as a university professor, I cannot say that basically I don't actually believe in God. So that's the the normal course of humanity. So what we're getting is, of course, the particular repression that comes with our era. And we know what's in this era of this disinformation and misinformation, the era of the terror that other countries are interfering in our domestic affairs. That's as distinctive of our time, and I don't think that's going to go away. If it's not Russia, it'll be China. If it's not China, it'll be Iran. Well, there's always going to be somebody who is interfering with our wonderful lives, and we have to protect ourselves against it. Steve Brown says, I think again apropos of Putin's joke, keep your friends close and your enemy closer. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that's exactly apt, because I don't think Putin regards Trump as a friend or as an enemy, or Harris as a friend or an enemy. I think that I just think that they feel that they really burnt their fingers in 2016, and now they're just having fun, essentially mocking the Americans. I mean, which I think is what he was doing. They're just mocking the Americans. Well, you're so preoccupied with our interference in your election. Okay, here's a little interference for you. We're backing Harris. Do what you will with that. So I think that he's just having a bit of fun with that, and it's and it is fun, because now the Democrats are kind of at an embarrassment. They have to explain this. Oh yeah, well, Putin was just trolling us and whatever, but then nonetheless I have to explain it. And as always, when you're defending yourself, then you're losing. Steve Brown says no such thing as a good war or a bad peace. I agree. Lynn says Tucker's recent interview with Jeffrey Sachs was brilliant and on point, even though 2 hours. No, I agree, and that's why I didn't think that this interview. I think this interview could have been much better had Cooper kind of stuck to his points, or if Tucker had been able to keep him on point, but somehow he couldn't. I mean, it's Tucker's a sort of a very gracious and nice guy, but he's not good at imposing himself on his interlocutor, trying to make him get to the point. I mean, we saw what happened when he was interviewing Putin. First question, and then Putin goes off on this lengthy discourse on Russian history, which went completely over the heads of the 99.99% of the audience who was watching. They had no idea what he was on about, and Tucker several times tried to interrupt and get him back on point until finally he gave up. But the thing was, again, Cooper was talking about interesting things, but he just seemed unable to stay on topic, and I think that kind of undermined that interview. Lynn says you're looking very fresh and suave today, George. Oh, thank you very much. I had a haircut, so thank you. Errol Flynn, yeah, that's good. Who else is there? Errol Flynn, Mickey Rooney. I'll take Errol Flynn, I think. But Mickey Rooney, strangely enough, how many he had 8 wives? I can't remember how many times he got married, and some of his wives were really attractive. Ava Gardner, I don't know. I can't remember all of the wives, but he had some of the most beautiful stars in Hollywood. Anyway, Steve Brown says it was a post relating to Israel that locals removed and warned me about as hate speech 5 months after the posting was made. But it wasn't here. It wasn't on our locals page. It was I assume it was someone else's locals page. But that's very bad. I didn't realize locals was doing that. So that very 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 sad to hear it. Okay. Anyway, so then Cynthia says we should be much more worried about Google, Facebook, mainstream media, CIA, and the Democratic Party influencing our elections than the Russians. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, this indictment was itself a massive interference in the election. I mean, it was basically saying, hey, look at all these conservative influencers who are all supporting Trump. Hey, they were on the Russians' payroll. And even if you say, yeah, but it was inadvertent, that's not an excuse. They'll say, hey, you were getting money from Russia. And of course, the Twitter world has erupted gleefully. Oh, look, Tim Pool was on the payroll of the Russians. And then, of course, Tim Pool has to issue his kind of not exactly a mea culpa. So I didn't know anything, and anyway, I hate Putin. I hate Russia, and so on. So that's what they all do. They will now have to bow down and denounce Russia, much as Trump was forced to do in 2016. And you're absolutely right, Cynthia, that they interfere in these elections in a very one-sided way. I mean, when they did that in 2016. Remember, in 2016, it was a complete crop. What they did, they had no basis whatsoever to launch an investigation of Trump and Russia. None. I mean, this was this was the best part of the Durham report, when he said that when they opened Operation Crossfire Hurricane, they had not only they had no basis for starting an investigation, they didn't even do the rudimentary work that would be necessary in order to start an investigation. I mean, there was that Peter Strzok and there are others around him didn't do, they didn't even go into the FBI database and see whether there's any record of Trump or anyone around Trump interacting with Russians. They didn't do anything. They just simply started the whole thing, and they knew exactly what the effect of that would be. And so, and then of course, what they did subsequently, when they knew that there was nothing, no basis at all for the Steele dossier, they kept that hidden, and then they kept hidden, Igor Danchenko, who was supposedly Steele's main source of information for that Steele dossier. And Danchenko was just simply, he's a hustler in Washington. He wasn't some deep source buried in the Kremlin. They knew that. So they knew that basically there's nothing to Trump and Russia. Steele dossier is a crop. But instead of that, they took Igor Danchenko, made him a confidential human source, which meant that no one knew who he was. No one could interview him. Congress really wanted to get to the bottom of the Steele dossier. They wanted to talk to Steele's source. No, sorry, he's a confidential human source. You can't get at him. And he was kept hidden. It was only because some very smart guys on the internet, like our friend Hans Manke and Jeff Carlson, that they kind of figured out who this confidential human source was, with all sorts of clues that were in Michael Horowitz's report on the Carter Page affair, which at the heart of which was the Steele dossier. So that's how that's how they manipulated the 2016 election, and then they did the same thing again in 2020 with the Hunter Biden laptop. Exactly the same thing. They moved in, they smeared Trump, supposedly that the Russians are out to help Trump, and then they kept hidden as much as possible from the public the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop, and particularly they instead suggested that the Hunter Biden laptop was a fraud perpetrated by Russia. And now they're doing the same thing. Again, they're doing exactly the same thing. They stepped up September, 2 months before the election. How long have they been sitting on this information about Tenet Media? I am sure they got onto that a year ago. They knew this in 2023 about this Tenet Media. They waited and waited until after Labor Day, the day after Labor Day, to drop the hammer and say, oh, is it Tenet Media? Oh, it's being run by the Russians. Oh, saying, oh, the Russians are trying to help Trump. Oh, the Russians are bankrolling all these conservative influencers who are supporting Trump. Exactly the same thing. It's the same playbook. And since this is still early September, 2 months to go before the election, there's going to be more. This is just the appetizer for some a bigger shoe to drop. So, you're absolutely right, Cynthia. Got this, that all the interference that comes from the Democratic Party, the media, the CIA, and so on. And that's the interference. There's no Russian interference. I mean, it's just Russia's just not in a position to interfere. It doesn't have any agents of influence. It doesn't have any particular strong presence in the United States or in Europe. It doesn't have even the minimum media presence any longer, which at least it had, back in 2016 when at least RT was available on cable providers. It doesn't even have that. So it's the idea is just laughable that the Russians are able to influence the American elections. Steve says, in the U.S., Wall Street rules, not the president. Yeah, absolutely right. And then Cynthia says, go back to where Cynthia. Cynthia says, I see red flags all over the Tenet Media story, me too. The DOJ is essentially accusing these podcasters of being unregistered foreign agents, while they themselves are claiming they're victims of Lauren Chen, who's not being charged with any crime. It seems to me like it's a setup all the way around. I agree with that. I absolutely agree with you that it's a very, very strange thing. So that they essentially have got them smear these people. I don't think they've acquitted themselves particularly well. I think they should have been more wary when people are offering you big sums for very little work. Hey, we'll have 400,000. You think, well, hey, people don't just give you $400,000, for virtually no work. So they weren't very astute there, but okay, there's nothing ultimately wrong with taking money for content. But then when they started, we didn't know, that was just ineffective. I mean, they should have just made clear, well, we really didn't do anything wrong. Instead, they just started immediately. If only we'd known it was RT, we wouldn't have taken the money. Why not? Why not take the money? No reason at all. But the Lauren Chen thing is very interesting, and that I think we have to. It's a little like the January the 6th and the various characters in January the 6th, the very, very, very odd figures who played a crucial role in those events, but who strangely the FBI did not indict. They just they let them go there. People who were who are principals. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Anne-Marie, always good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, as always. Thank you for your generosity. And NKMRD says, Putin was being a bit of a Putin troll in that Tucker interview. Maybe. If that's the case, I don't think it worked to his advantage. I think that Tucker gave him a platform. I mean, there was a lot of curiosity around the world. This was essentially Putin's first interview with a Western journalist since I don't know how many years. Certainly, it's his first interview since the start of the so-called special military operations. So there's a lot of interest, and you got to keep in mind that it's always the first few minutes, the first 10, 15 minutes that are crucial, because otherwise people are going to lose interest. They're going to leave the room, go and do other things. So you've got to use those first 10 minutes to get your points across. And Tucker's question was salient. I mean, Tucker's question was indeed the most important question that has to be asked. What was it that made you decide in February 2024 to undertake this military action? What was it? What happened to make you think that Russia was under threat? I think that's a very, very good question. I probably would have asked exactly that question. What was it? I mean, I would then follow up. What were you hoping to achieve, and have you achieved it? Are you close to achieving it? But then Putin just went off, just didn't answer that question at all. And then went off in this long historical account, which I don't think had anything to do with what he was trying to do on February 2022. Certainly, he didn't talk about that in his speech announcing the start of his military action. I mean, there it was all about NATO expansion, the threat from NATO, the creation of a NATO anti-Russian state on our borders, and June 22, 1941. We can't have another Barbarossa facing us. So that's what he was saying in his speech. He didn't talk about all these fascinating questions about the 7th century. Anyway, Steve Brown says Mickey Rooney was quite a good actor when he got older. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I'm trying to think of it now. What roles he played. He made that played a cringeworthy role in Breakfast at Tiffany's. I'm sure you don't mean his role as the sort of the Japanese landlord in Breakfast at Tiffany. That was an embarrassing performance. But I can't remember what were some good performances that in his later career. Anyway, Steve Brown, when the lights go out at U.S. State. All right. Okay, Cynthia goes on. A few months ago, I recall you saying that socialism is fundamentally utopian, while communism is not. I didn't think I said that. I think both socialism. No, I said communism is utopian, and I said that. I mean, socialism. I guess is. Look, I mean, socialism has been around since forever, and I guess there've been a utopian socialism, and there'd been the non-utopian socialism. I mean, you'd have to say the social democracy that kind of emerged in the late 19th century. I mean, in Germany and elsewhere. I mean, that was not utopian. I mean, that was just a kind of a reformist socialism whereby more and more of the social product gets distributed, everybody gets something. But that's far from a utopia. I mean, the utopian idea and the utopian socialism was mocked mercilessly by, of all people, Karl Marx. Marx hated the utopians, but the utopians saw that socialism, once you've solved all the big problems, and apparently all the big problems are solved once you have a kind of collective ownership of everything. Once you solve all the big problems, then basically, the lion will lie down with the lamb. The rivers will flow with lemonade. The one who was the greatest exponent of that utopian socialism was, of course, Fourier. And Marx was he hated Fourier. Marx said what his was scientific socialism. So Marx, in theory, he wasn't really a utopian. He never really spelled out what his future society would look like. And he did that deliberately. He said, well, I'm just a social scientist. I can say this is capitalism is unstable. Capitalism will eventually be overthrown. And then basically, we'll have the proletariat will rule. But he never spelled out, well, how will people be able to live happily with one another? What happens to human conflict, human frustration, human disappointment, and so on, all the various aspects of human existence. How can socialism resolve that basic problem of the gap between aspiration and reality? How you deal with that? How do you deal with human loss and so on? All the ingredients of the human condition. Well, Marx said, I don't care. I'm just a social scientist. Just say, socialism. There's nothing we can do. We're going to get socialism. I mean, at least the utopians Fourier and the others, at least they tried to describe what this socialist society will look like. At least they made that effort. I mean, otherwise anybody can say, oh, well, we're just going to have socialism. We're going to have socialism, we're going to have socialism. Like Bernie Sanders. Well, anyone can do that. Anyone can just say, well, I don't know. I don't have any idea how we're going to solve all these problems, but we're going to have socialism. But anyway, just to answer the question, so I think there was the utopian strain within socialist thought, but the difference between socialism and communism, but that's a really whole big complicated subject in itself. I mean, communism is always way down the road before you reach communism. I guess communism is the utopian thing, but we're always a long way from that. But now, of course, we're even far from socialism. Anyway, anyway, you say, which I find a bit counterintuitive. Yeah, I think it's counterintuitive because I don't think I said that. Since I always thought of socialism merely just a milder version of communism. Yeah, I think that's right. So perhaps you can set me straight on that. No, I think I'm setting you straight that, yeah, your understanding is correct. I think you misunderstood, or maybe I just didn't explain myself particularly well. But the utopian, the utopian aspect of socialism is just that there were schools of thought within history of socialism who were utopians, but they didn't really prevail. The strand of socialist thought that prevailed and that won out eventually was the Marxist strand, and Marx was never a utopian. He was absolutely anti-utopian as you could be. But then, something like the Soviet Union kind of promised sometime, who knows when, we'll get to communism and we'll get to utopianism. But nobody really knew what that's going to be. So you can, any bloody fool can do that. Anyone can just simply, put off into the indefinite future a society in which all problems are solved. Yeah. Maybe in 100 years' time, maybe 200 years' time. Well, that's easy. Anyone can do that. It's the issue is, well, can you do it now? Can you do it in the next few years, and not promise, this utopian society 200 years down the road? Because that's easy. Anyway, and then Cynthia says that also a few months ago, a few months ago, you got me interested in rewatching Ninochka, starring Greta Garbo and Melvyn Douglas. I guess I got you interested because we talked about Melvyn Douglas in The Candidate, where he played Robert Redford's father. It's a bit silly, but gosh, it's really good Soviet satire film. It's even better watching a second time around. So perhaps you could put it up to a vote against some other Soviet satire films. Actually, that's a good idea. Right, that's a really good idea. Ninochka, Soviet satire films. Okay, Soviet satire films. Or more broadly, the satirical movie theme could be, say, communism as it confronts and clashes with capitalism, or something along those lines. That's a good idea. But Ninochka was then redone as a musical with Silk Stockings, with Sid Charisse playing the Garbo role. So it was a kind of a musical, but Ninochka was very funny. You're right. It's a bit silly and it's a bit heavy-handed. But one film that obviously would be like that would be 1, 2, 3, which I reviewed, but we didn't have a screening. 1, 2, 3 with Jimmy Cagney in West Berlin. He's the Coca-Cola executive in West Berlin at the time of the Berlin crisis, and that's a kind of a Soviet satire. And there's the same basic idea underlying it, is that you have this rigid communist. Though I don't think 123 had anyone who was a rigid communist. But the easiest thing in the world is for a rigid communist is to just abandon everything. Yeah, you know what? I really like the capitalist system. I think it's so much better than everything that I was brought up on. And so, but in the case of Ninochka herself, I mean, she just falls in love with this American guy, this Melvin Douglas, and suddenly she abandons all that Marxist-Leninist claptrap that she's been espousing, and and of course all the others, those three idiots who were subordinate to her, they also abandoned all of their Marxist-Leninist claptrap, but they were terrified of her because they saw her as the commissar, and they had to fall in line. Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, it's an entertaining movie. Obviously, it's full of the sort of the self-flattering ideas of the West. Oh, we're of course so much superior to them. But what's interesting, and I think with 1, 2, 3, is that the Russians are presented as basically good guys. They've sort of embraced the kind of Marxist-Leninism, which we sort of look upon as weird and kind of ridiculous, but nonetheless, okay, the Marxist-Leninism. If that's their thing, that's their thing. But fundamentally, they're good guys. They're kind of Russians, and have all the positive traits that Russians are supposed to have. They're friendly, they're generous, they they like good food, good vodka. They like to have a good time, and so generally likable people. And that's I think is interesting. So again, it's obviously an attack on the Soviet system, but fundamentally it's saying, yeah, but the Russians are really very good people. Just throw away all this Marxist-Leninist nonsense, and they're good guys basically. Ivan Grosnev says, George, how do you see the war in Gaza ending? I don't really see it ending anytime soon. I think it's going to go on for quite a while, because I don't see that Israel is getting close to defeating Hamas, and I don't think the United States, whether under Harris or under Trump, will pressure Israel essentially to call off the war without defeating Hamas. So I think it's going to go on. I don't think Netanyahu has any interest in ending the war. I don't think any of the people around Netanyahu have any interest in ending the war. I mean, we've seen now, all these hostages are dying off. There's fewer and fewer hostages left, and the war's going on. So we had all this hope that the issue of the hostages would bring this war to an end. People just would rather the war ends and we get the hostages back. That's not prevailing. Netanyahu seems to have won that fight. In other words, Israel has essentially abandoned the hostages. They've accepted that they're all going to die. So I don't see anything changing. I mean, Hamas could collapse, but I don't see that anywhere on the horizon. And then again, Israel could assassinate Sinwar. I don't think that's going to end the fighting. So I think it's going to go on for a while. It's horrific and it's brutal, but it's going to go on for a while. I mean, same with the war in Ukraine. I think they both, there's a reason why they've both gone on, much longer than anyone expected. There isn't any kind of a breakthrough that would bring the fighting to an end. I don't think Israel is going to achieve a breakthrough. and I'm dubious whether Russia can achieve a decisive breakthrough. And I mean, I don't mean that, well, they'll take Pokrovsk. That may happen. But the decisive breakthrough means that you take some strategically important location, and then you send in your forces. You make that count. You able to defeat your enemy. It's not sufficient. Well, we'll just capture this city. Yeah, and then what? Because it means that your enemy is just going to move a few miles, westward, and you're still going to have the same problem. I mean, the whole point of war is you don't just seize something strategically important. You exploit that. You send in your armored brigades, and they move quickly and take advantage of your capturing something strategically significant. If you don't do that, then the war just goes on. Anyway, Steve Brown says, George recalled that the Kiev regime has been bombing the Donbass for 8 years by February 2022. Besides the U.S. rejection of draft proposals made in late 2021 for an indivisible security agreement in the region, Kiev Azov greatly increased its bombing attacks and aggression in the Donbass region in early 22. I agree that Putin did not define that provocation leading to the SMO very well in the Tucker interview. No, I agree absolutely with everything you say. I think there were lots and lots of these provocations, and he should have absolutely said that to Tucker. And frankly, I think Tucker was expecting it. I think that's why Tucker asked him that question. I mean, Tucker came to Moscow to interview him, and I think he wanted him. Now, explain your case. People who are not, you have a huge audience here. Millions of people around the world are watching this. You have a huge audience. So make all these points. Explain. That was it. That was your first minute. You go first minute and say make all these points, all the points that you mentioned there about the proposals of December 2021. You could even talk about the NATO expansion. I mean, he talked about it later on, but it's not good enough for you to bring it up later on because no one's paying attention later on. People are only paying attention in the first half hour. And so he kind of missed that opportunity there. But those are absolutely the points you need to make. Not Soviet, but check out No Man's Land about the Bosnia War. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of No Man's Land. I mean, we can talk about that another time, but not a great fan of that film. Steve Brown says, apropos of Ivan's question about the ending of the Gaza war, in my opinion, only when Otzma Yehudit regime falls. Yeah. All right. No, I mean, again, that's why I just don't think anything is going to happen. And again, even if Netanyahu were toppled, I don't think whoever takes over from him is going to change policy. I mean, I don't think I mean, in fact, you could easily say that probably it'll be someone more hard line than he is. He actually is, not even a particular hard liner within Israeli politics. Steve Brown says, if only Egypt could get tough with Israel. Yeah, well, that was never going to. And Steve says, liberating Kramatorsk and Slavyansk is key to the end game. Well, that's the theory, but that's a long way down the road. It's a very long way down the road, and we have to see whether that indeed happens. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Kramatorsk and Slavyansk are critical, but they're that's even after Pokrovsk, you've got a long way to go. Anyway, I think my time is up. We've talked for some time. So thank you, everybody who has joined me. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for all your suggestions. And And Cynthia, thank you so much for that idea about the Soviet satire. I'm going to look into that. And again, if anyone has ideas about topics for film screenings, whatever, we did corruption. So we had the winner of corruption last Monday, which was Chinatown. I think we're probably going to do LA Confidential next Monday, and then got to think about what's going to be the next topic. So please, any ideas is very much appreciated. So thank you for today, and next time we meet, which will be next Tuesday, will be the debate night. So we'll probably be talking about the debate. So thank you so much. Good night. Have a great weekend. See you next week. All the best. Bye-bye.